Shirley, let's talk a moment about public-private partnerships and the role. We discussed this over the phone, but when you look at urban areas, it seems that you really need business leadership to help drive that. Has that been your experience in working?
Well, there's no question about it. Atlanta has a long history of public-private partnership, long before I was involved in public life, and the part of the job, my job as mayor, was to ensure that those lines of communication and that collaboration continued. So the expansion of the airport in the 1980s was very much driven by the private sector coming to the public sector and saying, we need to be sure that we keep our position as an air hub, an aviation hub in the southeast region. And that was a collaboration between the public sector and private sector, and actually still is in terms of the funding of aviation travel in the South in Atlanta. But the model that we have with purpose-built is similar to that, which is the private sector is very much in a leadership role in partnership with the not-for-profit and public sectors, because we recognize when we go into communities that we need the skills, experience, the network, and the vision of the private sector in order to tackle some of the toughest social problems and economic problems that a city faces. So purpose-built communities, as we know it, would not exist had this relationship not developed in all of the cities that I named. And we look very much, not just for philanthropy, but for sitting CEOs, corporate leadership, entrepreneurs, to work with us on building those partnerships. It's hard to be from Atlanta and not to be in favor of public-private partnership. If you know anything about the history of the city, all the way going back to the Civil Rights Movement, and even before that in 1895, I mean, there's plenty of experience, generations deep. So the challenge for our city is to maintain those relationships and not to have one sector or the other kind of get so far ahead of the other that you can't develop those alliances long term. I worked for Andrew Young, who was mayor of Atlanta, and he talked about that a lot in the 1980s. And even though he is a civil rights leader, he was clear from day one that the success of the city would be dependent on the partnership with the private sector. So just one brief story. For the most part, private leadership, business leadership did not support him in his nomination or in his campaign for mayor in the 1980s. But the first meeting that he went to after he was elected was a meeting of business leaders and entrepreneurs brought together by Mr. Guazzetta, who was the chairman and CEO of the Coca-Cola Company, in which he said, I can get elected without you, I cannot govern without you, and the city cannot succeed without you. Now, I wasn't there, but business people repeat that because they believe it generations later. So what I've heard here, the sustainability, the replicability, the innovation, the willingness to try something different is largely going to come from the private sector.
Very good.